All right, sorry about that. My mic was off. I thought it was on. We'll start over. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 7th, 2024 Policy and Government Relations Committee meeting of the School District of the Waukesha Board of Education. I hereby call the meeting to order. Want to start with verification of the meeting posting. Julie, can you verify the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
All right, thank you. Second on the agenda is the opportunity for citizens to speak. Julie, did anyone sign up to speak this evening?
We have none.
Okay. All right, then moving on. Before we get into our action items, I just want to take a moment to welcome to the committee Thomas Harland. He joined the board last week after his appointment to fill a vacancy, and this is his first policy committee meeting since officially starting with the full board last month. So welcome aboard, Thomas.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
All right. All right, so our first action item tonight is the minute approval from the September 9th, 2024 Policy and Government Relations Committee meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Mrs. Voigt.
So move.
Moved by Mrs. Voigt. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Borowski. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-0. All right, the next item is policy discussion information. I think we really need Dr. Siebert for this discussion, so we may need to take a brief recess until Dr. Siebert is available. All right. Yeah, I think we may have started just a tad early, but you and I can discuss after the meeting on that. So, Dr. Siebert, we have gotten through the approval of the minutes, so we're now on agenda item D, the policy discussion information. And the first item on here is Neola Update Volume 33, Number 2, May 2024 Overview.
All right. Well, we are moving right along. Starting on time, even a little ahead of time. That's the first time we've had that in a while. And we're already on letter D. So welcome, everybody. So we, Julie and I, met with our Neola consultant in later September. And we, as you know, per policy, have made the shift where we farm out the policies that make the most sense based on their numbering system to the other committees. So you'll see in pink on your sheet, we have 4 policies that'll be going to the Human Resources Department. We have 4 policies that'll go to Student Services, and then we have 5 policies that will go to Teaching and Learning. Interestingly enough, we don't have any for us in that update. So that's not the end of the world. We'll figure out that, just like tonight, there'll be some policies that we want to review periodically. That either the board president would like us to take a look at, or Chairperson Wad, or any of you. So we'll be able to do those types of things. We'll be able to support, I can support those administrators and committee leads in the other committees as well, since I go to those meetings, and then I meet with actually the cabinet lead of those committees, and we go through all those policies together so that they feel comfortable with bringing them forward to their committee. So every time we get one of those updates, it's subtly different, but that's where we're at. And actually, there's another one coming out in December. So we won't be, even if we don't have a tremendous amount of policies for a small period of time, we'll soon have another batch to look at.
All right, thank you, Dr. Siebert. Any questions on the Neola update? All right. Item 2 under agenda item D is Neola update technical corrections. So Dr. Siebert, I'll let you take it from here.
No, certainly, Mr. Wan, thank you. So with each of those recommended or rescinded policies that we just talked about, recommended revisions or rescissions, Neola also comes out with a list of technical corrections that we just report out to you on. They're very subtle, generally speaking, maybe naming a policy in addition to the reference number, changing a word such as district administrator to superintendent could be another example. Or, for example, maybe one of the easier ones to explain would be 3216 and 4216, which were called professional staff dress and grooming. They're changing the word to appearance to avoid any inaccurate conception of the word grooming. So when we have those little technical corrections like that, what we do is we just report to you that Julie goes in and makes those, submits them to Neola, and they get updated in board docs. That being said, if there's anything in those that you'd like to discuss, we certainly could, or we could pull it out of a technical correction if you like, and bring it forward at a future meeting as well. So maybe I'll just stop there, and then we can see if you have any questions.
Mrs. White?
I do. I'd like to talk about the 22-21 special observance days,
Sure,
pull it out to talk a little bit about it,
sure.
and 32-16 and 42-16 as well.
Sure. Would you like to do that today, or would you like us to do that in the November meeting?
Do it today. There's a couple things I want to talk about related to those.
Sure, okay.
But just a point of clarification. So when things come up for technical corrections, they're not, each one is not officially agendized, right?
Correct. We're just bringing them kind of we're showing you each of them in essentially a package.
Right. So I'm wondering if procedurally, the right way to do this is for that to be a request for a future discussion item so that, those policies are in the packets, we can look at I mean, obviously, they're attached, but I don't know with technical corrections whether anyone reviewed beyond just the words that were added or changed, or the technical correction itself, the policy in any depth. So I guess, Mrs. Voigt, I'd be interested if you would be open to, for those policies that you want to examine more closely, whether we pull those out and bring them back.
That's fine.
Okay. Anyone else have concerns about doing it that way? All right.
So thank you, Mr. Wanda, and thank you, Mrs. Voigt. So what we can plan to do is Julie and I will put 22-21 special observance days, and then 32-16 and 42-16 staff dress, and it'll still be called grooming at the time, because that's what the current name is. And then we can consider what those technical correction changes are, and then any other changes that the committee might wish to see with those policies. And we'll put those as discussion and possible action on the November agenda.
So I guess the other question I'd have is, if the technical corrections are typically made without debate, is there any reason that we can't have you just go forward with the technical change, make sure they're updated in our policy, and then discuss whatever the topic is that Mrs. Voigt is interested in reviewing relative to those policies as a separate matter? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I do understand what you're saying. So, yeah, I mean, I think technically, yes.
Unless, Mrs. Voigt, you have
it's
concerns
okay with
with the
Mrs.
technical
Voigt.
corrections themselves.
I was thinking.
No, there are things related, other things, questions.
Right, okay.
So then we would bring it forward in the case of 32-16 and 42-16 as staff dress and appearance, based on, we will make the technical corrections that that we are just announcing to you today. Then we'll put those policies on for discussion and possible action in November.
Sure.
Okay, perfect.
So then just for clarification, we don't have to vote on the technical corrections just because they're,
No,
Right,
we
okay.
we just bring them forward as a discussion,
Yep.
just to alert the committee that we made them.
got you, okay.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or
Mr. Julie?
concerns about the technical corrections? All right. All right, that takes us to agenda item E, policy discussion and possible action. Item 1 is policy 0167.3, public comment at board meetings. Dr. Siebert.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wad. So, this is a policy that has had a number of adjustments made to it over the past few years. It came to us in 2017, and then was updated in 18, 20, twice in 21. Dr. Piasek, and in 2022. So Dr. Piasek asked that the committee just take a look and make sure that that policy is still meeting the needs of the board. And just to give you kind of a high-level overview of what some of those changes were for your reference, in 2020, the name was changed from to public comment from public participation at board meetings, so public comment at board meetings. Change to the board may provide a period of one public comment versus shall provide one, because there is no statutory requirement that says you have to offer a public comment period. Change participation to comment in the policy language to be consistent with the new title, and added letter G, which says speakers shall address only topics within the legitimate jurisdiction of the board. In July of '21, letter K1 was added, which is the no obstructions between the speaker and the audience language. And that was when, for those of you that were with us, or maybe you recall, we were in a much smaller boardroom at Lindholm, and it was quite a bit more tight than what we experience here at Blair. In April of '22, the change of the length of time based on the number of speakers was put in. Prior to that, it was 3 minutes for all speakers, and then there was a provision put in that added that if it was less than 6 speakers, that each speaker got 5 minutes. And then it also added letter I, 5, 6, and 7, with more specific language around warnings and suspensions for people at meetings. And then it also created K4, which was the announcement of the speaker expectations prior to each committee and full board meeting that the chairperson or the board president reads. So that's in a nutshell kind of what has happened over the past 3 to 4 years. And based on that, when Julie and Mr. Wad and I went through the agenda and started talking about, it's rare for us just to bring a policy without any recommended changes or anything highlighted. So we kind of put our heads together, talked about some of the things in the policy that could be worth the committee considering. And one of those was separating out or delineating the difference between public comment and decorum at board meetings. So changing the title to be public comment and decorum at board meetings. And then essentially taking the information that was in the back of the policy, moving it up under public decorum at board meetings on the second page, and then creating a piece at the end that says if the public comment guidelines or public decorum expectations are not met, then this is what the presiding officer may do. So bumping that language down, since it could apply to both a speaker or someone not meeting the decorum expectations during the traditional part of a board or committee meeting. So it was actually, I thought it was pretty good thinking, actually. It was really, we owe Mr. Watt a tremendous amount of gratitude, because as we were looking at it together, he's got a great eye for detail, and he was pointing out some of the things that might be confusing, right, in the way that it currently was written. So, again, it's for the committee's consideration. We can move in this direction. We can leave it as it is. You can decide whatever you think, or we can tweak what we have here. So with that, I think I'll just stop and let the committee ask questions.
Okay. I'm going to just offer one quick observation before we get into questions. I'm wondering if, and this is more of a formatting issue and perhaps a titling issue, so following item B3 under public decorum at board meetings, I'm wondering, rather than making it look as if the next section, if public comment guidelines or decorum expectations are not met, is a subsection of public decorum, we might want to pull that out as its own header. I don't know how we want to title that, but I'm wondering if perhaps we might want to reformat that so that it's clear that it's board meeting public comments, public decorum, and then the, basically the, rights of the chair, or the board president, at a meeting for dealing with situations where those are, perhaps violated.
That makes sense to me.
So are you talking about just formatting it all the way to the left?
Yeah, and I don't know if we want to put like a title on it, something to the, something to the effect of presiding officer, rights. I'm not really coming up with great wording for it now, but something that basically identifies what the presiding officer's, options are if, the policies, and guidelines here aren't met during a meeting.
Yeah, and just, again, not to get too detailed here, but looking at just the font size and type. So at the top, the 0167.3, we've got public comment and decorum at board meetings, right? As the title.
Yes.
And then underneath that, a little bit smaller font, public comment section of the meeting, right? And then when you go to page 2, I believe the public decorum at board meetings should probably follow the font type and size and all the way to the left that the
Yeah.
public comment section of the meeting does, right?
Yep.
Which then would lead to your other point of the, if public comment guidelines and or public decorum expectations are not met, that should also be
Yes, I agree.
maybe smaller and all the way to the left. Okay. I don't know if you gathered all that, but that's,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Julie, you were able to capture all that? Yeah. Okay. Okay, Mrs. Voigt, I believe you had, raised your hand with,
I have something to share, but I'm just thinking about what kind of heading we could use for that
Oh,
third
sure.
section. Options for presiding officer, maybe? Or what could be the word to let you know that this is what, you know, when things aren't going like they're supposed to, what can you do about it? So I think it really should be a third section. I think
Yeah.
that's a really good call.
maybe presiding officer actions or,
Is there any other policy that dictates the actions of a chair when presiding a meeting?
that's a good question. Dr. Siebert, do you know the answer to that?
We will know that certainly very soon, Mr. Harlan.
I'm wondering if something like rights reserved for presiding officer, and then it could go into the, you know, what the presiding officer may do if those guidelines or expectations aren't met.
If I may, Mr. Wad, back to Mr. Harlan's question. We
Yeah.
have policies on the presiding officer, on committees, but nothing that would get as specific as what we're getting in here. Good question.
So I don't know that this is something that urgently needs to be brought up for action tonight. Certainly we can if we want to, but I'm wondering if, you know, we can maybe, in the interest of time, provide some different suggestions for the titling of that section and the formatting and bring that back at a future meeting, perhaps next month, depending on what other discussion we may have around the policy and other potential changes people may recommend, if any at all. Yes, Mrs. White.
Again, you know, if we're going to sort of set that aside. You know, my original comments were, I really appreciate the changes that are made to this particular policy. I was involved in the original writing of it, and the revisions, many of the revisions I was suggesting along the way. So I really appreciate, and I think the reordering now is just a good way to have it written for flow. I think it's a very, very positive change. I had felt threatened after I experienced a total lack of decorum, at a meeting after I was no longer on the board. And I was just speaking as a citizen about renaming Les Paul, cafeteria for Theodora Yeomans, and I was heckled and had signs behind me and things like that, I did suggest many of the changes that have come to fruition here. And I really appreciate that response that, the new board had made at that point. The main thing I think that I'd like to talk to is number 5. I like what it says, through the last phrase. I'm not quite sure, so maybe we have to just read through it to understand, what I'm saying. Notify speakers who violate the above-mentioned criteria that future inappropriate behavior during public comment or during the board meeting could result in sanctions and possible suspension of speaking privileges at future board or committee meetings. I think we could stop there, because I'm not sure what the last phrase means.
So I'm going to venture a guess here, and Dr. Siebert, you've probably been a part of these discussions. My suspicion, just reading this again, could result in sanctions, et cetera, provided that the speaker's behavior does not constitute a safety concern. My assumption here is that if the actions that are causing the concern at the meeting pose a safety concern, then it's immediate and there doesn't
It's
have to.
immediate, okay.
That's my assumption. Is that
Okay.
correct, Dr. Siebert?
That would be my understanding of it too,
Yeah.
yeah. You're probably not going through, as the chairperson, all of that information. You're just acting to remove the
Potentially
individual
unsafe.
from the,
situation.
and protect the safety of that individual and everybody in the room.
Yep, okay.
Okay.
I guess but if that's the case, I wonder if we should make that clear. Like maybe that should be a period after meetings and then make a statement about it being a safety concern and what would happen.
So potentially having a separate bullet point or number for, if the speaker's actions are, potentially threatening or unsafe, that person may be asked to leave immediately or may be removed.
Yeah, I think it could
'Cause
still
I
be,
do think it's worth clarifying that.
yeah, I think it could still be part of that one, because like in 7, there's a few sentences. So,
Because I'm looking at 2, request any individual to leave the meeting when that person does not observe reasonable decorum, or if they present a safety threat.
I actually I think that simplifies it right there.
maybe, yeah.
So it sounds like we just want to we want to put a period after at future board or committee meetings in 5. And then remove everything that follows in 5, and then after does not observe, when that person does not observe reasonable decorum or their behavior constitutes a safety concern.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
Is that, everyone okay with that?
Yes. So I have
Yeah,
I guess,
Mr. Borowski.
just a question or something else to explore. I understand generally that we want just one person, the presiding officer, in charge of making the decisions. However, in a board meeting, well, I guess let me just say this. Is there any option other board members have in a board meeting when we're hearing public comments to interject or stop or suggest to the presiding officer that something that was said, was inappropriate?
So, Dr. Siebert, I believe you serve sort of as our parliamentarian. So I'm wondering if, in a situation like that, a board member could raise a point of order and appeal to the chair or the
Yes.
presiding officer.
Yeah, I was going to use the term query, same
Right.
thing, right? Point of order.
I think
Yes, I believe that would be the appropriate way to do it, Mr.
Yeah.
Wallner.
All right, so basically Robert's rules and
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because just in my experience of being on the board, 2.5 years or whatever it's been, it's somewhat difficult to listen to someone and then after they say something, then you got to quickly think, oh geez, was that appropriate or not? And should I be interjecting? And also just the fact that in board meetings, you not only have more, committee/board members, you have 9 instead of 3 to 5 that's in a committee meeting, you also have the majority of comments. So I think it's more likely, because of the number of comments and the number of people on the board versus a committee, that's likely to come up. If that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any comments, concerns, revisions, things they want to talk through? I know one of the reasons we kind of thought that might be good to bring this forward is because there were a lot of changes that were made. We've now had an opportunity to see how some of those work. And people may have some thoughts on whether it's time limits or any number of other items. I've had people suggest things to me just generally. I'm not going to get into them. I'd prefer they do it themselves. But this is also an opportunity for that to start with this committee, so. Mrs. White?
I think saying that the time that we're allowing is 30 minutes unless we make an exception to the rule, that procedurally, and then the way the committee, the policy has now broken it down that it's 3 minutes if it's under, if it's more than this number, and 5 minutes if it's under 6, type of idea. I think that that's a fair way to allocate that 30 minutes time, that's being allowed. So I think that those have been really positive changes.
So I have gone back and forth on this. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of the time limit. I mean, not on the individual portion, but in terms of time boxing, how much we allow for public comments generally, whether it's at the committee level or at the board meeting. It's my opinion that anyone that shows up here that's taken time out of their schedule to come down to our board meetings to express a concern or whatever the case may be, something that they feel is important to share with their elected representatives, that they get the opportunity to. The only reason that I haven't sort of suggested we change that is because I haven't seen an instance yet where someone hasn't been allowed to speak. But with that being at the discretion of the chair or the president in the general board meeting, it's possible we could get somebody else who may want to be rigid about that. I've watched and attended other board meetings where they are rigid about it, and there are people who have not gotten an opportunity to speak, and it's led to all kinds of other problems where people holding specific viewpoints made sure that they were the first ones to sign up to ensure that those who had opposing viewpoints didn't get an opportunity to have their voices heard. I don't think we've had that occur that I'm aware of. I believe, at least for as long as I've been coming to board meetings for, 4 years now, anyone who's wanted to speak that has been here before the meeting started and gotten their request in has been able to, but it may be something we want to think about. Do we want that time box or not? Mrs. White?
Well, I think the statement that, prepare a 2 to 3 minute message, so if you've got 15 people here, it'll be down to 2 minutes, and it'll work out accordingly. But, I think, and that's what we've done. When we've had 20, 30, 40 people sign up, we have extended it to an hour and beyond. But I think to say that if you come and want to speak, you have at least a minimum of 2 minutes. I think that's like the box out kind of idea. I think that we're saying we're not going to not give you a chance to speak if if it's reasonable to make sure that you can have at least 2 minutes to share your thoughts. That's how I'm interpreting this,
Mr. Brooks?
So it sounds like, Mr. Wad, what you're suggesting is, we haven't had these scenarios pop up, but essentially just putting a guarantee in our public comment policy that if you show up and sign up within the time limits that are, laid out in policy, that you will be guaranteed your time to speak, whether it's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, however much time that you are guaranteed an opportunity to address the board no matter what. And we'll still keep a time limit box per person, but what you're asking is to remove the parameters that we're only gonna set aside 30 minutes of board time for public comment, that we will go as, as long, until everybody gets their 5 minutes or however long that is.
That's, I think, a fair encapsulation.
And I think that's what,
That's right.
unless extended by a vote of the board or unilaterally by the board president or chair, is there. That is a kind of expectation that we're going to give you the time to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly vehicles in the policy to extend it. My concern, of course, is that left to one person's discretion or a vote of the board, a decision could be made to not, to basically ace somebody out of speaking if they happen to be last on the list, which opens up a whole nother potential can of worms, which is, and, I've been on the other side of this table where I've seen people try to manipulate the order in which speakers are going to appear at that podium. And I'd prefer that we don't have to get into one of the situations I've observed in another school district where there are people who specifically flood the lobby where the sign-up is occurring to prevent other people who they know aren't there yet from being able to speak. I have a lot of faith in the board members we have now, and I would like to believe that I could have a lot of faith in future boards to not play those kinds of games with our citizens when they appear to speak. But I also wouldn't be opposed to sort of enshrining it in policy, with the understanding that any future board could change the policy right back if they wanted to. So it could be it could be a more of a symbolic exercise than one that actually has any sort of long-lasting teeth to it.
I guess another thought on that, while I agree that anybody who comes should be able to speak, just again, in my time on the board, public comments have probably gone about an hour on the long side, But while the policy here says that speakers should plan to deliver their message in 2 to 3 minutes, that's typical. Let's say, for instance, there's 60 people that sign up, and we want them all to be heard, but I guess, manage the meeting within reason. Does the presiding officer then say, all right, you're going to just get a minute to speak or a minute and a half, but we're going to hear everybody? I guess the should 2 to 3 minutes to me is not a guarantee. It's saying that's likely to what it's going to be. And that's the flip side of it, is we have 150 people sign up. Unlikely, but
Okay, so I'll just share sort of my opinion on that. And I know it's not shared by everybody, and that's fine. I tend to be sort of a free speech absolutist. And I tend to believe, particularly when citizens take time out of their schedule to come to address their elected representatives, we ought to be ready to sit here and listen as long as it takes, no matter how many show up. That's my personal belief. I also understand, in the interest of trying to efficiently do the business of the school district beyond just, having the public address us, because there are potentially other methods that those constituents or stakeholders would have to address individual board members, at least, that not everyone would agree with that. So that's ultimately, at the end of the day, those are the couple of reasons why I haven't actually proposed the changes. I'm throwing them out there for discussion because I'm kind of curious where other people stand. Is that, that there are two sides to that, and I understand them both. I just tend to believe that when someone shows up to speak to the board, they should get the opportunity. Mr. Brooks?
Yeah, I tend to agree. If you're taking time out of your day to be here, we owe it to you to listen. I guess my question, in a scenario where we do get a number of people that show up, would we consider giving priority to constituents of the school district of Waukesha versus folks that reside outside of the district, or district parents perhaps that open enroll their kids from outside the district? Like, I don't necessarily know that that's the right thing to do, but I also think that if we want to prevent people who are just, members of an organization that are here to advocate on a specific issue but don't have any stake in the school district of Waukesha, should we make parents of district kids have to wait through all of that, or should we let them get the first crack at it since they're the immediate people who are affected by the decisions that we make? I'm not advocating for it one way or another. I'm just kind of pontificating here a little bit, but just trying to think of what we can do to make sure that we're giving the people who our decisions directly impact, I guess, the greater say or the more immediate say.
Mrs. White?
It'd be hard to do that screening,
Yeah,
when you've
no,
got
that's fair.
60 people signed up, who you give priority to. Two comments related to that. Item B, under the public comment section, when we originally wrote this policy, any individual having a legitimate interest in the actions of the board may comment during the public portion of a meeting, is how we sort of tried to come up with a way to say, originally it said you had to be a resident in Waukesha. And that was saying, you couldn't be like a second parent that doesn't live in Waukesha,
Right.
and not have a chance to speak. And we brought, or like a staff member that lives out of the city limits of, the community of Waukesha, and travels here to work here,
Right.
wouldn't have been able to speak. So we tried to come up with a way to say that, or if they have a specific interest, we were looking at alternatives to our liaison officer situation, and like how have they done it at other schools. And we had some people who came in to try to talk about those, like, well, should we give them a chance to speak or not? They're not residents of the school district of Waukesha. So there are a lot of things that, like, we were trying to come up with a way to say that like, how do we give priority to the people who have a vested interest and legitimate interest in being here? So it's definitely a work in progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely appreciate you providing that context. That makes a lot of sense. I think it's, we talk about this all the time here. It's hard to balance everybody's interests as a stakeholder. And you're right, there are people outside of our community who still have a vested interest in public education as a whole, or have a vested interest in what we're doing here, right? If you own a business within the school district of Waukesha boundaries, but you live elsewhere, your business is still impacted by the quality of students that we produce here. So it's hard to try to balance all that out while still keeping in mind that, some people are impacted by our decisions more than others, but we have to give everybody the same opportunity to speak and be heard.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I'll call out too that I think sometimes is overlooked or maybe minimized. Every single Wisconsin taxpayer contributes to the operation of the school district. We get state aid. That comes from income taxes, sales taxes. And so my philosophy is if you have even a dime of your tax money that's helping to run the school district or is being contributed to the school district, you have some stake in it. Now, I have no issue with the idea of maybe trying to prioritize, but the thing I worry about if we do that is then we put a lot of pressure on our secretary. And I'm not sure that we want to do that either.
No, I think that's a fair point.
Mrs. White?
I think another point that kind of evolved as we were working on this over in the past was the fact that if you would have 60 people here and you don't want to, there's limits in terms of how many we can possibly have speak in the time, in the way we've set up the parameter of 30 minutes plus extending it, that you can register an opinion on the form without taking the 2 minutes to speak. And that could actually be included in the minutes to have that opportunity, even without going to the podium. And I think there are a lot of people over the years, when you do see huge crowds, have opted for that, let me just put, like, I'm against this, and just make that kind of a statement as like presenting an opinion without having to have a 2-minute or 3-minute slot to do so.
Sure.
And I think that was a positive thing that we kind of put in as a Plan B.
Yeah, I guess just suffice to say, since I brought it up, again, I'm not talking about not having people speak, but just the way I read the policy is there's a maximum guarantee of 5 minutes, but there's no minimum. We say what they should plan for, so I think it does give some wiggle room in the unlikely event that we have 60 speakers or whatever it might be, some large amount to possibly give, minimize their time, but still give them an opportunity to speak, so. And that's fine. I'm fine with that.
Right, a lot of discussion. I'm not seeing any motions at this point. Obviously, we have, with this being coming back in a month, we'll have some time to kind of think about this, and hopefully our colleagues on the larger board will get an opportunity to see this discussion, and if they have any suggestions, they can pass them along as well, or be prepared to submit amendments once this gets to the full board. One thing I wanted to call out, because this is perhaps, I think, the one actual verbiage change aside from the title, and it's under item 1, under what the presiding officer may do. Interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement when the statement is too lengthy, personally directed at individuals beyond the board and the superintendent, abusive, obscene, or irrelevant. So we added the at individuals beyond the board and the superintendent. I had made this recommendation because, again, as an elected representative, I believe I have an obligation to sit and take whatever someone wants to dish out to me, provided that it's, not a, possible safety issue. So I was always kind of concerned about the personally directed without there being some qualification as to who's protected by that. I've seen plenty of board meetings where I've seen presiding officers shut down comments that they just don't like because they're calling someone, perhaps that presiding officer, corrupt or incompetent or whatever, and they will shut that person down. And I would never want to see that occur here. I think all of us that run for these offices need to be prepared to take the criticism, no matter how harsh it might be, when our constituents come to talk to us. So having said all that, and we included the superintendent as the chief executive officer, who's also at this board table. I did have someone reach out to me, though, and ask why we stopped at the board members and superintendent and talked about cabinet-level positions and suggesting, well, they're public officials as well. They're public employees, and they are in the room. And so I'm going to throw that out there because that was something that was brought to my attention. I had kind of gone back and forth on it when we were discussing these revisions, and I can see maybe both sides of it. But I want people to be aware that that change is in there, and whether or not we leave it as is or we make some changes we may want to think about as well. Anyone have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that the cabinet being here, present in the room, that comments, could be directed to them. And I have seen that in the past. They haven't necessarily been negative comments, but I don't know. To me, my gut reaction is it would make sense beyond the board, superintendent, and his cabinet.
Yeah, okay. Anyone have any objections to that revision, to that language?
I guess as long as the comments that are being directed towards them are germane to what is within the scope of their job, right? It's not just personal insults or bringing in personal life things for the sake of just going after somebody. Obviously, that goes along with just kind of the general decorum argument, but I agree that, you know, they are at the table, they are an extension of those of us who are here, so I think it's fair game that they would be included in that.
Yeah, and I think what you described, Mr. Brooks, would be covered by abusive.
Right.
Right? I mean, if someone's making fair comment, no matter how harsh it might be about someone's job performance, that's one thing. When those comments turn personal, then obviously, I would hope the chair would exercise their discretion to bring those kinds of comments to a halt. All right, so we've all agreed we're going to adopt that for a future consideration.
Sure.
Yes, Mrs. White?
Do we actually put in the point of order concept that you had raised?
Yeah, no, I,
Just said that committee members would know that they have that, like chance to say point of order, and, if they think that things aren't going, it's not being responded to. I'm just wondering, I think it's
Yeah.
a good point, does it need to be included?
I don't think that it needs to be included in this specific policy. It's just a general
Concept.
meeting that we have that ability to call a point of order at any point.
Yeah, I think that would be my concern, if we start including all the different options that board members may have under Robert's Rules of Order.
yeah, right. And that was my gut reaction too, and I brought it up. I appreciate you mentioning it, but I don't think it's necessary
Right.
with the Roberts rules, so, thank you, though.
Did we ever solidify, so the third area title?
Yes.
Is there anything you feel
Oh,
like you were leaning more toward?
I
We had
think rights
presiding-
reserved to the presiding officer.
Rights
works.
reserved to the presiding officer. I think that sounds good. Anybody has
okay with
any
that?
other ideas? And again, we'll,
Yep.
Billy and I'll tweak this up, we'll bring it back in November, and then we can have discussion again and see where it lands.
and just for clarification, are we adding the superintendent's cabinet to item,
I believe we agreed we were.
okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought, I just wanted to make sure. All right, thank you.
Julie, did you capture that? That we're adding that? Okay. I just want to make sure that we were all on the same page. All right. Any other comments, concerns, anything else we want to talk about relative to this policy, which I think we'll target to bring back? Yes, Mrs. White?
I just think it's at a much better point than it was 6 years ago. And our level of discussion here is like much, much less than that had been. It was really intense at that point.
All right. If not, I think we can move on to the next agenda item. So that takes us to policy discussion and possible action on policy 0144.5, board member behavior and code of conduct.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wad. So, in this particular policy, there's a recommended name change. So the new title would be Board Member Behavior, the addition of the word communications and code of conduct. There's a new letter A, and then everything is renumbered. So A states, attend all scheduled board meetings insofar as possible and become informed concerning the issues to be considered at those meetings. And then there are, in C, there's the description of bylaw 01433, just the term conflict of interest. In N, we're making the recommendation to, when talking about board members informing themselves about current individual issues, to use the word professional development organizations as opposed to the specific professional organizations that were in there, as those, as we've seen, tend to change over time, and so this then would not have to change going forward. And then on page 3, And 4, there are just 2 more additions or 3 more additions of actual, what the name of the policy is in addition to the number. And then there is an addition under enforcement on page 3, where the president or vice president can contact the district's legal support. The vice president would do so in the instance where there was a concern with the president. Otherwise, it would be the president contacting the district's legal counsel on behalf of the board. I think that essentially summarizes it.
And just to clarify, Dr. Siebert, these were all recommendations that came from Neola, is that right?
Yes, all with the exception of N, that Julie and I suggested, are suggesting, or me, I guess.
Oh, right.
Professional development organizations versus
WASB.
the Wisconsin Association of School Boards and the National School Boards Association.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. White?
I appreciate the concept of professional development organizations as a generic, but I think after nearly 100 years of referencing the kinds of amazing programs that are available through the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, et cetera, that could be in parentheses as an example of one professional organization that we might go to, just because our board has decided not to do it for this 1 year in time. Like, we've got like 90-plus years of them being a really great resource. That, I guess I can't justify striking them from being listed as a great resource that school board members can use.
I guess the question I would have is, if we're not a member of that organization, could we use them? In which case, why would we list them if they're not a resource that's available? I think the point, if I understood it, of making this change was that no matter what professional organizations we belong to or don't belong to anymore or change, this policy wouldn't have to constantly be revised based on what professional organizations we either are a part of or that we somehow draw a list up of that are okay or not okay for members to attend. Mr. Brooks?
Yeah, I think this makes it easier in terms of just not having to redo this policy based on what future boards decide to do in terms of membership organizations. But I think it's also a good change because this way we're not picking and choosing which ones we want to put in policy that we deem as a district are worthy of putting in policy. I think this opens it up to any membership organization, professional development organization that we choose to be a part of in the future without specifically calling out individual ones and giving them sort of a perceived priority or preference versus others. I mean, there are a number of other professional development organizations that we have been a part of or could be a part of that we could include, and then this policy becomes several pages longer because we're listing out all of them. I think this just makes it simple and it doesn't show favoritism towards one organization over another.
Any other discussion on the changes proposed in 0144.5? Mr. Borowski?
Just a minor one, but at the bottom of page 2, can we just make sure the title, board member use of electronic communication devices prohibited, makes it to page 3? So the break is right before then? Okay.
Sure.
And I can sleep at night then.
I have a couple questions.
Yes, Mrs. White?
In K, at the top of page 2, encourage the free expression of opinion by all board members and seek systematic communications between the board and students, staff, and all elements of the community. My question would be, does that mean that if a board member would like to put a topic on the agenda, does that say that they would have the right to have that freedom of expression to be able to put a topic on the agenda? Because it does say down under the enforcement C sanction that, you would lose the right to do that if, you're in a, situation where you're going to be restricted from being able to, in C, restriction on board members' rights granted by policy, including requesting items for a board meeting agenda. That's like a punishment to say, no, you can't put an item on the agenda. But other than a sanction, is this saying that any board member should have the opportunity to be able to suggest topics to discuss?
Well, I guess I'll kind of offer my thoughts on this. I don't know that it deals at all with agenda items. My assumption is that this basically says we preserve, our First Amendment rights are preserved as a board member. Like, obviously, we have those things which we have to do to make sure that we clearly identify whether we're speaking on behalf of the board or as an individual board member or private citizen. But I don't see anything relative to the agenda. Now, I don't know that anyone is prohibited from suggesting an agenda item, but my understanding of policy is that ultimately it's the presiding officer's discretion as to whether or not those items are added. Dr. Siebert?
Yeah, so that's a great point, Mr. Wad. So in the agenda policy, which is 0166, it does say exactly what you just said. So any board member may call upon the president, superintendent, or committee chair with recommendations for agenda items on or before 5 working days prior to the meeting. If the request is timely, the board president or committee chair may place any board member requested item on the board agenda or committee agenda at their next regular meeting. So it is at the discretion of the chair or the president.
Any other comments? Mrs. White?
I'm wondering what P means. Refrain from using their board positions for personal partisan gain.
Dr. Siebert, do you have any insight into that item?
Can't say I have a tremendous amount. I mean, that has been in there since the origin of the policy. Personal partisan gain. As we all know, school board positions are supposed to be nonpartisan, right? I don't know if that would be referring to running for another elected office of some sort. But like most things, if we don't have a clear understanding, it doesn't mean we have to keep it either, right? Sometimes policies are kind of loaded with information that we can't always define.
Additional comments, discussion? So at this point, I think I'd be looking for either a motion to approve as presented. I don't believe we've made any changes, right? To what's proposed here?
I have one more question I have before.
Okay, Mrs. White?
At the top of page 3, there's a whole section on not using electronic communication devices such as cell phones, smartphones, et cetera. And I'm a little concerned with the way it's written, that it's almost saying that if there's a weather situation going on and they're trying to let you know that, hit the deck, go down to the
Locker
area
room.
below because of there's a, tornado coming, warning coming through.
That would
et
never
cetera.
happen here.
I know it would never happen here. They say in case of emergencies that that'd be considered an exception, but it's like it's prohibited during board meetings to have your phone available. If you know that like just to have it out and available, it just seems pretty harsh to say no, you can't. I know there's several times that I've had contacts come in when people back when we tried to broadcast our cable TV is like, hey, it's not showing up tonight. You could be able to connect with the camera people and find out what was going wrong, that it wasn't working properly. I know that what they're saying here in the policy is concern, is valid, but I think there's, the absolute prohibition except in an emergency, it could be a family emergency that you're waiting to hear how someone's, doing after surgery or something, and it just seems harsh to have it be written such that, it's prohibited, except in a case of emergency.
Well, it does call out that exceptions may be made by the presiding officer in the case of an emergency or other special circumstance. So, I'm just trying to imagine, I'm sitting in a meeting, I get a phone call from my daughter, she's got a flat tire, she needs help, right? I may be asked by the presiding officer, Mr. Wad, can you please put your phone away? And I could explain, I'm sorry, my daughter's having, a roadside problem right now, and I may ask to be excused to go deal with it, but I have a hard time believing that in the type of situations that we're talking about here, that any board member is going to be sanctioned for using an electronic device or cell phone in a situation like we've described. I think the whole purpose of it is so that people aren't just scrolling the internet or communicating with people relative to board business while board meeting is going on. And I think those things are relatively easy to identify when they're occurring, but
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Mrs. Voigt, but I also think your explanation, Mr. Wad, especially with the special circumstances statement, that it, I don't know, for me, it addresses it enough just in that statement. Yeah. I don't know, after discussing it, does it seem to address it?
It's just, as I read it, it just made me feel like I read the is prohibited during
Yeah.
board meetings, and then it's like, okay, there is the little bit of exception there. But I know there have been concerns about, people having like a cell phone up, and during the course of a board meeting, it's like, are they getting, feedback from the community, or whatever, that, yeah, I totally agree that, there's a valid concern to not have it be, an open time for cell phone use.
I think what makes it kind of seem that way is in the policy, they spend an awful long time describing why we should not be using our cell phone, and then it just says it's prohibited. There's a long, so, yeah.
Mr. Brooks?
Yeah, it seems like it's more targeted towards just, so what we teach our middle and high school students,
Put
put your phone away because it doesn't look like you're paying attention. It's the same thing for us. I do wonder, and this could be one of the exceptions that's made at the discretion of the presiding officer, but is there an exception where, let's say you have, we're debating a policy and someone has a article or a reference that they want to bring into the discussion that helps aid that argument that they're trying to make, is somebody able to read from a written document on their phone to provide context to some comments? I know that's something that we see often on the floor of the state legislature where people ask the speaker, permission to read from a printed document. But that was one of the other examples that I thought of that, okay, well, this could at least be, it's not me trying to check the Brewers score last week when we had a committee meeting. It's pertinent to what we're doing as a board. That was the only example after Mrs. Voigt brought up her comment that I could think of where, okay, maybe we might have an opportunity for some leeway. But again, I think that could also be up to the discretion of the presiding officer.
All right, any other comments or questions? I would entertain a motion for approval if anyone is so interested in doing so. Otherwise, I'd be looking for a recommendation on how we address this policy, whether we want to send it back with Dr. Siebert, but I don't know that we've suggested any changes or raised any.
Yeah, also move for approval.
Right, moved by Mr. Borowski. Do we have a second?
I second that motion.
Seconded by Mr. Harland. Any further discussion or debate? Hearing none, I'll bring it for a vote. All those in favor of passage, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Opposed? No.
Opposed? Okay. All right, vote is 4-1, passes. All right, next item, order of business is item F. Number 1, CISA 1, representative update. Mrs. Voigt.
Would you be able to call up the logo that's on the attachment?
Put it on the screen.
Put it up on the screen?
Sure.
I am the rep to CISA 1, and they sent a monthly report. And one of the things in the monthly report is as an agency update, is the explanation that they rebranded. And I think to see the image that they're using as their rebrand gives a lot of insight into what the organization's all about. And so I'd like to take a few minutes to explain their new logo, once he's able to call it up. It's, kind of speak to it while he's getting it there. They've redesigned their logo to better showcase them as a trusted and innovative leader in education. Here you can see the logo there. The gold circle on the right that you see is supposed to represent, is interpreted to be the learner. And the learner's position in the center of the C, visualizing they're representing commitment to surrounding and supporting learners throughout their educational journey. It's kind of interwoven, the elements of that, of the C, representing collaboration and connectivity, and reflecting their emphasis on stakeholder engagement and professional development. They have a fresh new tagline, the learner-centered solutions. So one of the things that the district's able to do is to contact CISA 1 to be able to get help with, some of the student situations that we have, that we need some additional support and community collaboration to be able to make a success. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, my business and marketing background. So I share that rebranding kind of a situation, and the notion that it is learner-centered solutions. The report actually includes a variety of different professional organizations that they offer. This indeed could be one of the professional organizations that we could reference for support. And in that context, I was pleased to see that in the latest newsletter that Mary Jo put out, they reference that our special ed staff that are working with support roles in the classroom are actually using CISA for that kind of, the teams for special education, will continue to work with a trainer from CISA, was one of the references that was made, and I thought that was really, really good. And I shared the list with Jan about these are the kinds of programs that they're offering, that she could take advantage of those whenever would be appropriate for for our staff development. So, thank you.
Nice. That's great.
Great. Anything else? Any questions or anything for Mrs. White? All right, thank you, Mrs. White. On to item 2. Dr. Siebert has an update for us on fire drill legislation. Dr. Siebert.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wad. So this was a topic, I think, that dates back maybe to the summer that we had talked about when we were starting to plan all of our legislative visits in the summer. And the concept behind it was state law requires a fire drill every month during the school year. Usually we try to pick one of the nicer days of the month, right? We don't always hit a home run on that, but keeps the kids in practice. But we also do a number of other safety-related drills, particularly early in the year, to practice. And so the concept that we discussed was, could it just be one drill per month, but it wouldn't have to be a fire drill? Like, you could mix in the other types of drills and still do one every month. we talked with Representative Allen specifically about the idea. And when I reached back out to talk to them, they said that after discussing this idea with firefighters and other school districts, it became pretty clear that there's not an appetite for change at this time. So it appears like it won't be going anywhere. But again, many times ideas take a couple of cycles to go through on a number of different legislative topics, as Mr. Brooks probably can help us with. And so we'll see if it ever does get some legs, if you will, but at this point, it doesn't appear to have any.
Thank you, Dr. Siebert. Comments, questions?
Could I also, Mr. Wad, mention that?
Yes.
So, Mr. Brooks talked about artificial intelligence a few months ago. We will have Senator Julian Bradley joining us at our next Policy and Government Relations meeting. It's on November 11th. And so he is the chair of the Artificial Intelligence Study Committee, is it, Mr. Brooks?
Yep.
That occurred over the summer. So he's got a great handle on the work that committee did. He'll be able to talk about what that committee accomplished and what they see as next steps. And then I've also asked if potentially we could have a discussion on what would be the 25-27 budget with him too, via our government relations component of the meeting. And I'll work with Mr. Wad, but if it would be okay with the committee, since he would be coming at 7, maybe we could do the government relations part first. Let him have the opportunity to meet with us, and then he can be on his way when we get to we can just invert our order.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. Anyone else have? Yep.
Related to that, we have policy 5505 on academic honesty, I think is one of that we're supposed to be looking at some point.
Yes.
And the AI component of that, I was thinking it tied really well with that,
It could.
as one of our
Yes.
topics coming up. So that was one of my things for future discussion, like almost verbatim. We talked about it at our meeting on the 12th of September.
Oh, yes.
He was willing to come in, and I think he'd be an excellent resource since
Yeah.
he's on that legislative committee.
That's a great point, Mrs. Voigt. Thank you.
Now we just got to get those people in finance to stay within the time frame.
Yes, they did a good job today. Yes. But then I was late. I was out in the hallway, so I apologize for that.
All right. On to the next agenda item, recommendation for future meetings. Anyone?
You already nailed it.
All right. I need to make sure I write this stuff down. I don't have the date and time of our next meeting.
November 11th.
November 11th.
11th.
November 11th? Okay, so next meeting will be Monday, November 11th, in this room. With that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.